Hello, good evening. Tonight we're going to review this album from Pink Floyd, The Final Cut. And I've got a special guest here, Mr. Nick Ryan, who's going to look at this album with me. And it was the last album with Roger Waters in the lineup, so quite historic. And we don't normally drink beer during these reviews, but we're drinking beer tonight. Cheers. So it came out in the spring of 1983, which makes it 34 years old, if you can believe it. And for years I thought it came out in 82, but I checked the date and it was 83. And I think the reason I thought it was 82 is because there's a reference to the Falklands in a couple of the tracks, and obviously that was 82. So
and it was their first album after The Wall, wasn't it?
It was the follow-up to The Wall. So a couple of things to show you before we go through the tracks. This single, When the Tigers Broke Free, was supposed to be on The Final Cut, and actually on the back it says taken from the album The Final Cut. But thankfully it was not included because it's not a very good track. It's from the movie The Wall. Do you remember it?
Which track is that?
When the Tigers Broke Free.
Oh, yes, I do, yeah.
I mean, lyrically it's okay, but as a song it's not much. So this was the album. So not a very interesting cover compared to Animals or Wish You Were Here, but symbolic. This is a quarter of a poppy here, and this is a kind of war medal. Soldier's war medal there on the front, there, and then the lyrics in very small type, so you almost need a magnifying glass to read them, I found. Or maybe you never read them.
I only had the cassette, actually.
The cassette, well they'll be even smaller on the cassette.
Yeah, that's right.
And then some pictures kind of a poppy field and something else, and then it's in this black sleeve, and it's quite a cool label with the World War One field and the poppies there.
Ironically, you know where I first heard this album?
Where?
It was actually in Belgium, in Waterloo. So,
Oh, really?
I had a friend from university who lived in Waterloo, and I went to stay with him on holiday, and he played this album in his car, which at the time I didn't obviously put the connection with the poppies in, but looking back on it, there's a bit of a coincidence there anyway. But
okay, well I'm going to ask you in a minute your overall impressions of this album, but just before I do that, this was the single Not Now John, which, believe it or not, on the radio they had to change it from F all that, we got to get on with this, to Stuff All That. And this 12-inch single has the single version and the album version. Obviously the single version was a complete cop-out as far as I'm concerned. I think these days you'd be allowed to get away with anything on the radio, but back in 1983 they had to do that. So this is the 12-inch single on the same label as the album. Didn't do very well, and Gilmour sings lead on that track. It's the only track he sings lead on. So Nick, do you want to tell me about your sort of first impressions of this album?
It's not my favourite album, to be honest, my favourite Floyd album. I felt that it continues with the Wall in terms of, Roger and the Wall was very bitter about life, and his bitterness seems to have become extreme in this album, I think, to some extent. I found it a bit too bitter, to be honest, but there are some good tracks in it, so I'm not writing the album off totally, but a little bit too bitter for me. I think some of their other Floyd albums I prefer them.
Okay, I mean, I think it's a fair comment. A lot of people have called this a solo album in disguise, and I'd probably go along with that. I know Gilmour and Nick Mason had a hard time recording it with him. By that time, any band chemistry had all but disappeared.
And
Richard Wright wasn't even there.
Yeah,
He'd left the band after The Wall. So you've got Andy Bone on Hammond organ, and you actually got Andy Newmark playing drums on one of the tracks, who played on the solo tour with Roger in 1984. So I think we're going to go through the tracks. Something I've missed I was going to say. In terms of bitterness, I mean, it has to be said that Animals from 77 is every bit as bitter as this. And The Wall as well, in its own way, every bit as bitter as this. But I think where this one slightly doesn't have the same impact is because he's not being as generic. Like Animals, he's talking about a good portion of the human race, but he's talking about it metaphorically in the form of pigs, sheep, dogs, in the George Orwell fashion. And in The Wall, he was talking about teachers, but he was also talking about authority, and it was quite generic as well. But on this one, he actually mentions quite a few politicians and historical figures by name, and I think with hindsight, obviously it dates the album, and it makes it have a little bit less longevity, perhaps. So that's kind of a minor criticism from me, but it's still very much on a par with The Wall, concept-wise and musically speaking. It has several highlights. So we'll just go into the tracks. So The Post-War Dream, What Have You Done, Maggie, What Have You Done?
It's funny enough, I know Roger would hate me for saying this, but I actually love that lyric, and sometimes when I'm fed up with other politicians who, in my opinion, aren't quite as good as Maggie, I often sing that to myself. What have we done, Maggie? What have we done? But I think Roger would probably shoot me if he heard me.
Should we shout? Should we scream?
Yeah.
What happened to the post-war dream? Yeah, it's a very strong opener. It's not very long.
That's another thing. I found that track a bit strange because it seemed to just sort of suddenly end when I expected to go on a bit longer.
It could have had a solo or something.
Yeah.
Because most of these... Actually, I have to say, a lot of these Pink Floyd songs are a little bit kind of... They're kind of going through the motions, and you get a Gilmour solo turning up in virtually every other song on the album. It's almost as if the producer, who was it produced by? Let me think. Roger Waters, James Guthrie, and Michael Kamen, or whoever. Maybe Gilmour said, "Well, can I do a solo here?" Because in almost every song, you've got Gilmour coming in and doing a solo, and it's kind of like a bit perfunctory, like, okay, here comes the solo kind of thing. Whereas on The Wall or Animals, it had been a bit more natural, I think. So the musicianship is a little bit forced. As I say, not much chemistry. More like a Roger solo album with Gilmour playing as a session musician, which I'm sure he didn't want to do. And I've read an interview recently where he argued that Roger leaving maybe left us with less musically, but it also gave us a lot more freedom. Because I think the atmosphere inside the studio by the time they recorded this was pretty bad. If you listen to Roger, it was pretty bad even after Dark Side of the Moon. So anyway, we're here to talk about the music mainly. Your Possible Past is next, and it's okay, lyrically it's okay, but it's not very a strong melody, and it's hence a bit of a forgettable track, I think. One of the few, again, bit short, okay, nothing special. The Hero's Return, it's another song about, all these songs are about World War II, really, and his father unfortunately did get killed in the war, and we all feel sorry about that, but I think he went a bit overboard with some of the songs and some of the lyrics on this album. There's a nice reference to Madmen Don't Blow Holes in Bandsmen by Remote Control. I think that's in The Hero's Return, isn't it? Which is a reference to the IRA bombings of the 80s, early 80s. So The Gunner's Dream, another song in the same vein. It's a little bit similar, a bit too similar really. Paranoid Eyes, I think, is quite a strong closer to side one, and it containing these glorious lyrics like alcohol's soft middle age. The pie in the sky turned out to be miles too high, and you hide behind paranoid eyes. I think that's a really great closer to side one. Side two opens with Get Your Filthy Hands Off My Desert, which again mentions quite a few people. Brezhnev took Afghanistan, Begin took Beirut, Galtieri took the Union Jack, and Maggie over lunch one day took a cruiser with all hands, apparently to make him give it back. So quite an effective little song, but again, not leaving much to the imagination, very specific lyrically, but quite successful in on that occasion, I think. The Fletcher Memorial Home.
Yeah, I like that. I like that one. It's again obviously very bitter, but just sort of have all of these top politicians of the day and imagine them in some sort of old people's home, all being completely mad, and as they later became, unfortunately. But yeah, that's very effective. Southampton Dock.
Yeah, just before you go on to Southampton Dock, one of Nick Mason's favourite tracks on the album was Fletcher Memorial Home, he said, and it made it onto the recent compilation, Pink Floyd compilation. I think the only track from this album to make it on there. Southampton Dock is one of my favourites. They disembarked in 45.
Yeah, and no one laughed and no one cried.
There were too many spaces in the line.
And it goes on to talk about Maggie standing in Southampton docks, obviously when the ships went off to the Falklands.
Yeah, but he doesn't mention her by name.
No.
I don't think, which makes the song more effective in my opinion. I think Roger's always been more effective when his lyrics are slightly more generic and not specific. Because not everyone loathes Margaret Thatcher, for example. Right? We'll leave it at that, shall we?
Yeah.
We'll leave it at that. Okay, then Southampton Dock, really a fine track. And then the final cut, I like it. And this is one song where the guitar solo works from Gilmour, I think. This is the back cover, by the way. Would you sell your story to Rolling Stone? Leave me alone, that kind of thing. It's good, I like it. Side 2, probably stronger than side 1 on the whole.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I don't like getting into these side 1 versus side 2
No,
debates, but on this occasion,
yeah,
Not Now John was the single, and the album version is quite amusing. Fuck all that, we've got to get on with this. And then at the end, saying, where's the bar in 4 different languages? French. Excusez-moi, où est le bar? Oi! Where's the fucking bar, John? Good end to the album. Good end to that song, and then very strong closer to the album. Well, you said you don't particularly like this track. But
I find it too depressing, to be honest. That's why I don't like it. 2 Suns in the Sunset. Obviously, one of the suns being a nuclear explosion, I assume.
But I think melodically, this is the strongest track on the album. Andy Newmark's on drums, by the way. And I just love the last verse in particular. And as the windshield melts, my tears evaporate, leaving only charcoal to defend. Finally, I understand the feelings of the few. Ashes and diamonds, foe and friend. We were all equal in the end. I just love it. I just think that is head and shoulders above any song on the album for me. Melodically, lyrically. Okay, too depressing for you, Nick, but listen to it again, loud.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll enjoy it. Good solo at the end from the sax player as well. So, I think we're all agreed it was a bit of a come down after the wall, but how could you follow such a classic double album?
Yeah.
But having said that, I think we're both agreed that it's a lot better than Pink Floyd trying to carry on without Roger, which was a bit of a mistake, I think. But
I'd agree,
And then, Roger's solo albums have their merits as well, and we can maybe do a review on those next time you're here, Nick.
Yeah.
Okay?
I'd agree with that.
Good. Anything else to add?
No.
Thank you for watching.
Yeah.
See you next time.
Cheers.